Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 257, going back to a topic I've been rather interested in as of late.
I'm just curious, man.
Yeah, you're curious. You're bi-curious, probably.
That being the weird and wondrous world of Dojin metal, a topic that I initially dipped my toes into on the Merging Moon episode around Thanksgiving of 2021, where I briefly got into Undead Corporation, but then I elaborated on much more substantially a year later with the Imperial Circus Dead Decadence episode. And in fact, the band that we will be covering this week is something of a much lighter mirror to Imperial Circus Dead Decadence, because we are going to be talking about Unlucky Morpheus, a band named after Lawrence Fishburne's post-Matrix career.
Oh, rimshot!
I view this band as something of a light side of the force counterpart to Imperial Circus Dead Decadence for a whole slew of reasons.
Out of like, what the fuck is 4 plus 4? 8.
To start off with, both of these groups started out as sort of like fun artistic side projects of people that otherwise had day jobs. In the case of Imperial Circus Dead Decadence, kind of began as the solo project of a man named Yuki, who made his living as a manga artist of the
hentai
variety, and he kind of kept it running as, you know, sort of like a wacky doujin Toho metal side project before it blossomed into the avant-garde melodic black metal masterpiece it is nowadays. In the case of Unlucky Morpheus, it started out as a fun side project of two people, that being itinerant guitarist slash multi-instrumentalist Shiren and the well-known power metal vocalist Fuki. So now we got a Fuki and a Yuki. Isn't that zany? But even before Unlucky Morpheus really got going, both of these musicians were personages of repute within the larger visual kei and doujin metal scenes. And it's worth noting that the artistic endeavors both of them had gotten up to prior to Unlucky Morpheus really taking off heavily influenced their work in Unlucky Morpheus. So it's worth taking a closer look at the careers of both of these musicians prior to Unlucky Morpheus really becoming a thing. Ladies first, here comes Fuki, who has a name that might sound a little bit off to Western ears, but she is an incredible front man, or front woman, or front person of color. That color, of course, being terrifyingly glacially pale in hue, to the point where I'm pretty sure she's in some sort of wacky competition with Dahyun over who is more deserving of the sobriquet of tofu.
Yeah, that's a joke.
Speaking of which, I know we all love Gio's hyper-complex, super rehearsed choreography, where she puts her arms out at weird angles and comes up and down from the floor really fast and then dashes away. But there's something to be said for the manic improvisational energy of just kind of flinging your arms around and then running up a flight of stairs and jumping around in a circle on one foot completely unprompted. That's the kind of stuff you get with Fuki. And her vocals certainly match that sort of manic energy. Prior to Unlucky Morpheus really taking off, she was already quite famous for her lead vocals in the band Lightbringer.
It's me, the Lightbringer.
Who are actually a very interesting band in their own right, and I should probably do an episode on them someday. They started way back in 2005, and their debut album is particularly interesting because it honestly sounds like an artistic follow-up to a highly underrated band I covered on episode 229 of this program, that being Aphasia. I mean, I didn't even know anybody else even friggin' listened to Aphasia, but apparently these guys did. Even the album cover looks like a friggin' Aphasia photo shoot. And musically, it's very much in line with Aphasia's distinctive atmospheric blend of neoclassical power metal and atmospheric progressive rock. In terms of vocals, this album might be slightly disconcerting for fans of Fuki's latter-day work, because she sounds a whole lot like a much cutesier version of Aphasia's first vocalist, Luca, which might not mean a whole lot to you if you're new to this stuff, but it's way, way different than the style of vocals she'd later on become very famous for. It's actually very similar to the transition that Kamijo underwent in terms of tone between Lorraine and Versailles. It's not even like they're bad vocals, they're just so different. Going crazy with those orchestra hits. and just general super 90s sounding keyboard stuff. That first Lightbringer album, honestly, I recommend it, especially if you like aphasia and you want to hear more of that, or if you're already a fan of Fuki's more famous later stuff and want to hear her sound completely different. But later on, Lightbringer kind of came into their own. They considerably upped the level of neoclassical aesthetics going on in their music, but even more noticeably than that, they changed up their guitar style to something a whole lot more unique, where you'll have one guitarist doing these weird, jangly, almost kind of alt-rock lunacy style riffs, and the other guitarist riffing off of them with total European-style power metal riffs. And there we go, that's the Fuki we know and love. Or the Fuki you will come to know and love by the end of this episode, if I have anything to say about it. But this combination of Fuki's very strident vocal performance and the very scattershot method of guitar playing, as well as the increased emphasis on negative space and surprising amounts of change-ups, would become very important not only for Lightbringer, but also for the direction that Unlucky Morpheus would head in later on in their career. We'll see how that pans out for Unlucky Morpheus after we take a closer look at the prior endeavors of the other side of the Unlucky Morpheus equation, that being Shiren, guitarist and principal songwriter, who was in a whole mess of bands prior to Unlucky Morpheus being a thing. Notably, we have, how the hell do you say?
電気式家電音楽集団
Yeah, that, as well as Heaven's Feel, Icarus's Cry,
Magical Ninja, Radox, Satastrip, Yosei Deadlocker, Dragon Guardian, Lightning, Rosencrantz.
and Carbonic Acid.
That's a lot of names.
He also does soundtracks for a whole lot of games that, we'll just say, are of the same variety as the kind of manga that Yuki from Imperial Dead Decadence draws.
I do be loving me some Kumin.
And funnily enough, on the opposite end of the spectrum, he's actually done live guitar for Baby Metal before. But most importantly for Unlucky Morpheus, he was Kensuke's co-guitarist in my personal favorite era of Undead Corporation's discography, that being 2010 to roughly 2015-ish. That era being marked by a very impressive ability to walk a sort of precarious balance beam between some very ethereal pop music and very hard-edged, thrashy melodic death metal. Basically, it's archetypal Castlevania core, which is a genre label that I invented. But it makes sense that he would be in demand as a session guitarist, because as you can tell from this short sample, he's got a whole lot of range to him. And all of that combined with his penchant for highly emotive guitar leads, like the one you're hearing right now, would be a major stepping stone into the very exciting new music he would craft with Unlucky Morpheus. And so Fuki and Shiren meet up, which is understandable because Shiren actually did some guest guitar work for Lightbringer, and Fuki did some guest vocals for Undead Corporation. They meet up, and I assume one of them's like, "Hey, I noticed you liked heavy metal and video games and anime a whole lot. I think that's pretty neat." And then the other one was like, "Yeah, I love all that stuff. I think it's swell." And the first one was like, "Want to start a band about all that kind of shit?" And the other one was like, "Hell yeah, brother." Boom, Unlucky Morpheus. Here's another major parallel with Imperial Circus Dead Decadence. They kind of took a little bit to get their footing. They started out as very much a doujin sort of band. If you don't know what a doujin is, it basically means, at least in a metal context, it's like a fan project. They did a whole bunch of albums that were covers of like songs from anime, J-pop songs, Toho songs, video game shit. And it wasn't really around until like 2014 they started putting out original material. Even at that point, it still seemed like this was more of a fun side project for them. Even down to the cover art for their earlier stuff, which looks like a much more like lo-fi middle school notebook version of something you might see on an Imperial Circus Dead Decadence album cover. Musically, however, they were starting to take things a little bit more seriously. Which makes sense because by the time that Unlucky Morpheus got around to doing their own original material, both members had been professional musicians for going on a decade, and that of course means they are more than capable of putting out some quality vampire-themed dark gothic power metal stuff with a whole lot of neoclassical elements. Definitely the sort of thing that would get any fan of Versailles to perk their ears up. At this point in their career, they're still sort of like a two-person project that they're mostly just doing for fun. All of their other bands are running at the same time. But they don't just play vampiric power metal.
You wouldn't recognize a goddamn vampire if one jumped up and bit you on the end of your fucking dick.
There's also a whole lot of melodic death metal and melodic black metal influences that are an essential component of their sound at this point in time, including but not limited to blast beats, harsh vocals, and some very nasty sounding down-tuned guitars. They bounce these elements off of the progressive rock and melodic power metal influences coming from Lightbringer quite effectively. There's a whole lot of interesting trade-offs going on. And it makes Unlucky Morpheus circa 2014 to 2018-ish a very interesting listen for fans of this particular subset of wacky Japanese metal. But I can already kind of tell what you're thinking. This doesn't sound terribly out of the ordinary compared to like a million other Toho metal bands, you know? Like, what makes this special? Quit wasting my time.
Fuck your greasy Korean slut.
Well, hopefully you didn't say that last part. Because 1, rude. 2, this is a Japanese band. And 3, I hope you're not that fucking fat. Because that would just be a damn tragedy. But yes, this era of Unlucky Morpheus is really good, but it's nothing compared to how amazing they would get around 2018 up through the current day. Because a few very exciting things happened for this band.
Let me tell you a couple of 3 things.
1, Lightbringer went on hiatus, and Shiren significantly cut down on all of his side hustles. And 2, they filled out the whole band lineup with a second guitarist, a bassist, and the drummer from Galnerius. But 3, they brought in a full-time violinist named Jill, who not only resembles some sort of adorable woodland sprite, but is also fond of doing some very impressive Yngwie Malmsteen covers.
Based.
And this confluence of events made Unlucky Morpheus into the excellent band that they are today. For starters, that violinist. Okay, this was a really good idea. You're a symphonic metal band. Most bands in that genre, what do? They play the keyboards. Everybody likes the keyboards. But why not actually bring the symphony into your symphonic metal band? And I don't mean that cheesy Metallica S&M Dimmu Borgir shit where they just play live with an orchestra once or twice. I'm talking actual classical instrumentation going on. And Jill's violin style is perfect for a metal band because she can do a lot of very metal things with it. She can go very flowing and legato in a style that very much mimics the sonic character of a metal tremolo riff, with all kinds of cool glissandos and whatnot. Then she can also get really short and choppy with her bow strokes to kind of mimic the action of like a thrash metal palm mute or even a suffocation style jumble of brutal death metal notes. So this confluence of fortuitous events, the main songwriting pair quitting their other projects to focus entirely on Unlucky Morpheus, the member shakeups and the addition of a violinist really gave their songwriting a shot in the arm and made them into the unique band that they are today, much in the same way that there was a massive jump in songwriting quality between Imperial Circus Dead Decadence's second and third albums. It's a very similar story arc. See, already since you've got this dedicated bassist, you can do cool shit like this part and build up into some massive... Well, yeah, it's that part you heard earlier, but now it's within its proper songwriting context, okay? It's called building a narrative, which incidentally is something that the new incarnation of Unlucky Morpheus does very effectively with their songwriting. Witness this cool gradual lead guitar build-up. Almost kind of sounds like something you'd hear on Opeth's Blackwater Park, but instead of being in a bloated 12-minute long monster, it's in this very tightly structured song with an excellent sort of weird prog metal bar chord build-up into the return of that riff from the beginning of the song with a massive chorus. I guess it is kind of odd to have this Middle Eastern tinge to a song called... Maybe it's a commentary on the high population of Somali and Pakistani migrants within Scandinavian cities. Possible based and red-pilled Unlucky Morpheus? Yeah, you're right, hopefully not, because if that were the case, they would probably be a really fucking boring band instead of a really interesting one.
Man, you corny!
As alluded to earlier, most of these songs are very short and tightly structured. The last time they did a really epic length track was back in 2015 on the Vampire EP. But what keeps everything diverse and interesting is the variety of song forms they're working in. For instance, we have total tribute songs to late 90s melodic death metal, featuring re-examinations of all the tropes you've come to enjoy, such as... Wait, this sounds familiar to you? Oh yeah, I guess you're right. So yeah, pretty obvious musical reference to the Last Good in Flames album, but they do some interesting new stuff with it, like opening up the bar chords quite a bit more and incorporating some great neoclassical power metal elements. Also, I find the vocal duo of Sheeran on growls and Fuki on clean vocals a lot more easy on the ear than Anders alternating between passable screams and pretty shitty whining. Those punk-influenced gang vocals are a lot of fun too. Interesting vocal dynamic overall, not only paying tribute to the past, but improving on it in some ways. And there's plenty of catchy violin and guitar leads. Speaking of cool vocal performances, this stuff right here is a rather unique full synthesis of harsh vocals and clean vocals at the same time, with some clever guitar layering over the top of it. Certainly something that I think any fan of bands like Bloodstained Child would be interested in. On other songs from this area of Unlucky Morpheus, they bring back a lot of the black metal and gothic metal dark influences in their new, more succinct style. Some rather lengthy, complex melodic tremolo riffs. I think this one in particular is very interesting because it resolves in a very intestine Baalism sounding way. And in these more gothic-styled songs, we also get plenty of interesting vocal interplay going on between Sheeran and Fuki's different styles. But perhaps the best vocal performances are doing Fuki's solo sections, which heavily hint toward Kamijo's work with Versailles in terms of crafting very effectively dark melodies using power metal aesthetics. And speaking of making very dark music with power metal aesthetics, a lot of Sheeran's guitar work, particularly on the solo sections, reminds me of Andy LaRocque from King Diamond in terms of its blend of very recognizable melodies with some pretty out there spurts of technicality. On the opposite end of the spectrum from dark gothic power metal, there's a lot of very progressive rock infused bright melodic stuff that not only fully utilizes Fuki's Kaio Kyoku influences, but in a very Ouroboros sort of way. Reminds me a lot of the Aphasia influenced material on the first Lightbringer album from 2009. And it's this material that will be the most shocking to ordinary metalhead ears, due to its rather seamless blend of heavy down-tuned guitars with very pretty J-pop aesthetics. If you told me like 10 years ago I'd be into stuff like this, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but for a while this kind of stuff has been really growing on me. It certainly helps that a lot of it is extremely well crafted, particularly in the case of Unlucky Morpheus, who are very good at hitting a very difficult emotional target without sounding too silly. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Fuki is one hell of a vocalist. This part's really cool because the drum beat under it is almost like a dance beat. The guitars are doing this sort of ambient, heavy bar chord kind of sludgy thing, which frees up the violin to be the primary instrumental melodic voice that plays very well against Fuki's vocals.
Hold it. I know what you're thinking.
Some of you out there are probably saying, this just sounds a whole lot like anime music. And to those people, I would like to congratulate you for your incredible insight and valuable contribution to the conversation, without which we would all be lost. You did it! But seriously, Unlucky Morpheus is great. They're one of the few bands that have actually gotten better with each new album, to the point where I honestly think their latest album, Evolution, was my favorite album of 2022 that didn't have the words Imperial Circus Dead Decadence written on it. Although Akira Natsuki from that band has done graphic design work for Unlucky Morpheus in the past. Everything's connected, man. But that was a not-so-brief overview of what Unlucky Morpheus is all about. Hopefully you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, thanks so much for listening and or watching. Anyways, and I'll see you next time with more good stuff.
My girlfriend put ice cream in my PS5.